The slap came so fast that I did not understand what had happened until the entire table went silent. One second, I was sitting beside my wife at a private birthday dinner in Georgetown, trying to defend myself without embarrassing her. The next, her open hand struck the left side of my face in front of 11 guests. The sound cut through the room, louder than the music, louder than the clinking glasses, louder than anything anyone could have said. My cheek burned. No one moved. My wife, Vanessa Reed, stood beside her chair with her hand still raised, her eyes bright with anger. Around us sat her sister, several co-workers, and the wealthy friends she had spent years trying to impress. I had reserved the room, chosen the flowers, arranged the menu, and paid for everything. It was her 40th birthday, and I had wanted the night to be perfect. Instead, it became the final night of our marriage. I did not shout. I did not insult her. I folded my napkin, placed it beside my plate, put on my coat, and walked out of the restaurant into the cold Washington night. My name is Daniel Mercer. I was 40 and worked as a civil engineer designing bridges and transportation systems throughout Washington. I believed a man proved his love through consistency. He showed up, fixed what was broken, and kept his promises. That was how my father, Richard, had lived. He had also been an engineer, and when I was a boy, he often took me to construction sites along the Potomac. He taught me that structures rarely collapse because of one dramatic failure. Most of them weaken slowly. A small crack appears. Water gets inside. Pressure builds. By the time the damage becomes visible, the real problem has existed for years. I did not realize until that birthday dinner that he could have been describing my marriage. I met Vanessa at a charity event near DuPont Circle. She worked in healthcare communications and could command a room without trying. I was quieter, but she made me feel interesting. We married 2 years later at a small hotel near the National Mall. For the first few years, we were happy. We bought a brick row house in Cleveland Park. I renovated the kitchen myself, rebuilt the back deck, and turned the basement into an office for her. Vanessa used to stand in the doorway with coffee and say she had married the only man in Washington who could design a bridge and repair a broken cabinet before breakfast. Then her career accelerated. She began attending more fundraisers, private dinners, and networking events. Her closest friend, Allison Grant, was married to a lobbyist named Charles, who seemed to know every important person in the city. Their conversations were filled with political consultants, vacation homes, exclusive clubs, and invitations that made ordinary life sound like failure. At first, Vanessa brought me with her. Later, she began going alone. When I did attend, she introduced me as the practical one. She joked that I owned only 2 suits, could not tell expensive wine from grocery store wine, and preferred spending Saturday mornings at a hardware store instead of brunching at a rooftop restaurant. Everyone laughed. I laughed too because I thought a good husband should not be overly sensitive. But the jokes changed. They became sharper. She interrupted my stories, corrected harmless details, rolled her eyes when I spoke about work. If someone asked what I did, she sometimes answered for me. Daniel works with roads and pipes, she would say, as though 20 years of education and experience could be reduced to that. I knew she was becoming ashamed of me. I simply did not want to admit it. For her birthday, Vanessa asked for a dinner that would impress her friends. I reserved a private room at a respected Georgetown restaurant, ordered her favorite flowers, and invited the people she selected. The evening began well. Then Charles asked whether I was still doing construction. I politely explained that I specialized in structural rehabilitation and stormwater systems. Vanessa laughed. Daniel likes to make his job sound grand, she said. He is talented, but he is not exactly someone who understands how the real world works. The table grew quiet. I looked at her and said calmly, "That was unnecessary." Her expression changed as if I had challenged her authority in front of an audience. Then she slapped me. Outside, beneath the restaurant awning, I touched my burning cheek and felt something inside me become completely still. I called a rideshare, returned to our house, and packed 2 suitcases, clothes, documents, my laptop, a photograph of my father, his old drafting compass, nothing that belonged to both of us. 45 minutes later, I called my older brother, Michael, who lived in a townhouse near Capitol Hill. When I told him what had happened, he did not ask whether I was sure. He said, "Come here tonight." Vanessa called twice as I drove across the city. Then the messages appeared. "Where are you? I am sorry. I lost control. Come home so we can discuss this like adults." I read them the next morning at Michael's kitchen table, turned my phone face down, and finally told him about the years before the slap. Michael listened without interrupting while I described the small humiliations I had spent years pretending not to notice. I told him how Vanessa criticized my clothes, excluded my coworkers, and once asked me not to discuss a bridge project because Allison's friends would find it boring. Around her, I had begun rehearsing sentences before speaking. When I finished, Michael leaned back in his chair. "You understand that the slap was not the beginning," he said. "I know. It was only the first thing she did that you could no longer explain away." That sentence stayed with me. 3 days later, I contacted a divorce attorney named Rachel Bennett. Her office overlooked Pennsylvania Avenue, and she had the calm, direct manner of someone who had seen people destroy themselves by confusing revenge with justice. After I explained what had happened, she asked, "Do you want to punish your wife, or do you want to leave your marriage?" "I want to leave." "Then we will keep you focused on that." During the next several weeks, Vanessa apologized, blamed stress, accused me of abandoning her, and sent photographs from happier years. She kept asking how I could throw away our marriage over one mistake. But it had never been one mistake. It was 7 years of erosion, followed by one unmistakable crack. The divorce took 8 months. We sold the house and divided the proceeds. I refused to let furniture or investments become another chain connecting me to her. I kept my savings, credentials, my father's compass, and enough money to begin again. I moved into a modest apartment in the Navy Yard neighborhood close to the Anacostia River. The kitchen was small, but the windows faced the water. Each morning before work, I walked along the river. For the first year, I lived quietly. I worked for a larger infrastructure company that had hired me to help lead the rehabilitation of an aging bridge crossing the Anacostia. The project required structural analysis, drainage redesign, traffic coordination, and constant negotiation with city agencies. It was difficult, serious work. I loved it. At home, I cooked, read, and slept without waiting for someone to judge the shape of my day. Silence now felt like room to breathe. In my second year after the divorce, a colleague named Marcus Hale invited me to a weekly poker game at his row house in Shaw. The buy-in was $20. The food was terrible. The conversation was honest. Marcus was a structural engineer with an unstoppable laugh who never treated my reserve as a flaw. Over time, he became one of my closest friends. Through Marcus, I began taking occasional consulting work. A local developer named Howard Sloan needed help with a mixed-use project near the H Street corridor. The site had difficult drainage and an old foundation. I found 2 expensive problems before construction began and designed a solution that saved months of delay. Howard introduced me to investors, architects, and business owners who met every few months for dinner in a private room near downtown Washington. Unlike Vanessa's circle, these people cared about results. They wanted to know whether you kept your word and solved real problems. For the first time in years, I entered rooms without feeling the need to shrink. 3 years after the divorce, my life felt solid. I had meaningful work, loyal friends, and a growing reputation. I needed nothing more. Then Howard invited me to a spring dinner at a historic club near Logan Circle. He planned to announce a major redevelopment project involving several neglected properties east of the Capitol. He wanted me there as the engineering consultant he hoped to hire. I expected nothing dramatic. I had learned to trust ordinary progress. Halfway through dinner, my phone vibrated. The number was unfamiliar, but the Washington area code made me answer. Is this Daniel Mercer? Yes. My name is Thomas Whitaker. I am an attorney handling an estate matter. Your name appears in several documents, and I need to give you some difficult information. The noise of the dining room faded behind me. What information? He paused. Your former wife, Vanessa Reed, died 6 days ago. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood him. Vanessa was only 44. Thomas explained that she had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of ovarian cancer 14 months earlier. She had continued working until her health declined, then moved into her sister Claire's home in Northwest Washington. She had entered hospice 3 weeks before her death. I leaned against the hallway wall, unable to connect the woman in his sentences with the woman I remembered. Then he said there was a letter for me. Vanessa had written it shortly before she died and instructed her attorney to deliver it only after her funeral. She did not know my current address, so the package had been sent to Michael's house. My brother had received it that afternoon. I left the dinner without hearing Howard's announcement. 20 minutes later, I stood outside Michael's door, while the city moved around me as though nothing had changed. Michael opened the door before I knocked. He must have been watching from the window because he stepped aside without asking why I was there. On his kitchen table sat a thick cream-colored envelope with my full name written across the front in Vanessa's handwriting. I recognized every curve of every letter. For years I had imagined Vanessa contacting me, defensive, angry, or desperate to be forgiven. In those imagined conversations, I either confronted her or walked away. I had never imagined opening her final words after her death. Inside the envelope were 9 handwritten pages and a smaller sealed note marked "Private." Michael made coffee, placed a mug near me, and went upstairs. The first line read, "Daniel, I have no right to ask anything from you, so I will not." I stopped reading and stared at the sentence for a long time. Vanessa wrote that she had spent nearly 2 years in therapy. At first, she wanted someone to confirm that I had overreacted. Instead, her therapist asked her to describe our marriage without defending herself. That process, she wrote, destroyed the story she had told herself. She realized she was not truly trying to impress Allison or Charles. She was trying to silence a fear that had followed her since college, that she was ordinary, replaceable, and permanently outside important rooms. I had never made her feel that way. I had loved her when she had little money, before the promotions, before the invitations, before anyone in Washington knew her name. Yet, the safer I made her feel, the more carelessly she treated me. She had mocked my steadiness because it exposed how unstable and performative her own life had become. Then she wrote about the birthday dinner. She remembered the flowers. She remembered that I had pulled out her chair. She remembered looking around the table and noticing that everyone was impressed. And she remembered wanting more. When I told her that her comment was unkind, she did not hear a husband setting a reasonable boundary. She heard a man lowering her status in front of the people whose approval she valued most. So she struck me. Vanessa called it the most shameful act of her life. She wrote that the expression on my face after the slap had stayed with her. There was no rage in it, she said, only recognition. I looked at her as though I had finally seen the full structure of our marriage and understood that it could not be repaired. She said she knew the marriage was over before I left the room. For months she blamed me, stress, alcohol, Allison, and her childhood. Therapy forced her to accept that explanations were not excuses. She had chosen to humiliate me long before she chose to hit me. The letter also described what happened afterward. Vanessa gradually withdrew from Allison and the social circle she had once treated like a second family. Their conversations felt empty to her. She stopped attending certain events and discovered that several people disappeared as soon as she was no longer useful to them. She began volunteering at a Washington Children's Hospital. At first, she saw it as image repair. Then she met parents sleeping in waiting rooms and children celebrating birthdays between treatments. She wrote that those people taught her the difference between being admired and being needed, When her own diagnosis came, the lesson became personal. She did not tell me because she believed illness should not become a key used to reopen a door she had destroyed. She asked Claire to quietly learn whether I was well. Through mutual acquaintances, she heard about my bridge work, my consulting projects, and my friendship with Marcus. I was relieved, she wrote, to know that leaving me did not ruin you. It returned you to yourself. My hands shook when I read that line. The final page contained no request for forgiveness. She said she hoped I had found peace, but she understood that she had no right to be part of it. She wanted only to place the truth between us before she ran out of time. I opened the smaller note. It contained 4 sentences. You were never too small for my world. I made my world small enough that I could not recognize your value. The night you walked away, you saved the part of yourself I was slowly destroying. I am sorry I understood that only after it was too late. I sat at Michael's table until the coffee went cold. What I felt was not simple grief. I grieved the woman I had loved, the woman she became, and the woman she had apparently fought to become before she died. I grieved an apology that arrived too late to repair anything, yet somehow early enough to change the way I carried the past. When Michael returned, he sat across from me. "Do you hate her?" he asked. I looked at the pages. "No," I said. It was the first time I realized that was true. I took 3 days away from work. Washington had entered a bright spring week. The cherry blossoms were gone, but the trees were green, and tourists crowded the National Mall. The city appeared unchanged. I walked through it as though I were visiting another life. On the first morning, I went to the cemetery where my father was buried. His headstone was simple. Richard Mercer, husband, father, engineer. I sat on the grass and told him everything. I told him about the bridge project over the Anacostia. I told him about Marcus, Howard, and the redevelopment proposal. I told him about Vanessa's death and the 9 pages on Michael's kitchen table. My father used to say that a bridge does not defeat weight. It accepts weight, distributes it, and transfers it safely until the force reaches solid ground. Strength was not the absence of pressure. Strength was knowing where the pressure should go. For years I had carried my anger as though setting it down would erase what happened. But forgiveness was not erasure. The slap and years of humiliation remained real, but Vanessa's worst act no longer had to be the central event in my life. That afternoon, I called Claire. We had not spoken since the divorce. Claire told me Vanessa had died peacefully with family beside her and had remained clear-minded almost until the end. "I need you to know something," Claire said. "She never expected you to come back. She knew the letter could not fix anything." "I understand." She wanted you to know she finally understood what she had done. "I know that now." Claire began to cry. I listened. Before we ended the call, she asked whether I wanted to attend a small memorial gathering the family planned at a church near Woodley Park. I hesitated. Then I said yes. The memorial took place on a rainy Saturday. From the back row, I recognized former co-workers, relatives, and 2 guests from the birthday dinner. Allison was absent. A photograph of Vanessa stood near the front. She was smiling beside a hospital garden, thinner than I remembered, but peaceful. Claire spoke about her sister's humor, ambition, mistakes, and final years of service. She did not transform Vanessa into a perfect person. I respected her for that. Afterward, several people apologized. One admitted everyone at the table had known I was being mistreated, but no one wanted to confront Vanessa. His honesty angered me for a moment. Then I understood how easy it is for witnesses to choose comfort over courage. "You should have said something," I told him. "I know." That was all. Outside the church, Claire handed me a small wooden box. Inside were 2 photographs from the early years of our marriage and the handwritten card I had left for Vanessa on the morning of her 40th birthday. She had kept it. The card contained 4 sentences I barely remembered writing. "You make ordinary days feel important. I am proud of the life we have built. I hope this year brings you closer to everything you are searching for. I love you." Those words belonged to a man who did not yet understand that love cannot rescue someone determined to measure herself through strangers. I kept the card anyway. On Monday, I returned to work. Marcus entered my office carrying 2 coffees and a folder filled with revised site plans. "How are you?" he asked. "Complicated." "That sounds accurate." He placed the folder on my desk. "Howard moved the deadline. We need your drainage revisions by Thursday." I laughed for the first time since receiving the call. Marcus smiled. "Good. You are still in there." Work did not erase grief, but it gave grief a boundary. Calculations required attention. Meetings had schedules. Concrete, steel, water flow, and soil conditions did not care whether the engineer had spent the weekend reading a dead woman's apology. The redevelopment project eventually received approval. Howard named me lead engineering consultant. It became the largest private project of my career: residential buildings, public walkways, green roofs, underground stormwater storage, and a restored neighborhood park. Months later, I stood at the construction site while excavators moved earth and workers installed the first sections of foundation drainage. No one there knew about the restaurant in Georgetown. No one knew that years earlier I had packed 2 suitcases in less than an hour because remaining in my own home felt more dangerous than leaving it. They knew only that I had reviewed the plans, anticipated the risks, and designed systems meant to protect hundreds of future residents. That was enough. I finally understood that rebuilding did not mean creating a life with no evidence of damage. It meant using what you learned from the damage to build with greater care. The project took nearly 3 years. By the time residents moved in, empty lots had become apartment buildings, a community plaza, and paths that had once existed only as lines on my drawings. At the opening ceremony, Howard thanked the team. My name appeared on a screen for several seconds, people applauded, and the ceremony moved on. I liked it that way. The most important work is often invisible. Residents would never see the stormwater tanks beneath the plaza, reinforced foundations behind walls, or drainage channels below the paths. People would simply live there, trusting that the structures around them would hold. My life had become similar. I learned to speak when something hurt, that loyalty without boundaries becomes self-erasure, and that leaving can be courage rather than failure. I also learned that forgiveness does not require reunion. Vanessa's letter remains in a cedar box in my apartment. Beside it are my father's drafting compass, the birthday card she saved, and a photograph of Michael and me standing beside the Potomac when we were children. I have read the letter only twice. I do not avoid it because it is painful. I simply no longer need it to explain my life. For a long time, I believed the birthday dinner was the night everything was destroyed. Now I see it differently. The marriage had been collapsing slowly, but I kept reinforcing it with silence, patience, and excuses. The slap did not destroy the structure. It revealed that the structure was already unsafe. Walking out was the first honest decision I had made in years. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if Vanessa had followed me outside, apologized, and begun therapy before I packed my bags. Perhaps we would have tried again, or perhaps the damage was already too deep. I will never know. The life that happened gave me freedom, loyal friendships, and work that matched my abilities. Away from me, Vanessa confronted who she had become. Her growth did not restore our marriage, but change can be real, even when it arrives too late to benefit those who were wounded. One evening, I walked from the Navy Yard toward the river as sunset turned the Washington skyline gold. A train crossed a bridge in the distance, its weight moving from one section to the next. I thought about my father. When I was 12, he took me to watch workers inspect an old bridge over the Potomac. I asked how they knew whether it was safe. He said, "You do not ask whether a structure carries weight. Every structure carries weight. You ask whether it carries the weight without losing what it was designed to be." For years I had lost my shape, I had adjusted myself around Vanessa's embarrassment, her ambition, and her need for approval. I became quieter so she would not correct me, less confident so she would not feel threatened, less visible so she could shine. That was not love. Love does not require one person to disappear so the other can feel important. I stood beside the river and finally forgave not only Vanessa, but myself. I forgave myself for staying too long, for missing signs that now seemed obvious, for believing endurance was always noble, for thinking that a good man should be able to repair every broken thing. Some structures should be repaired, others must be left before they collapse on everyone inside them. Today, I am 47 and still live in Washington, D.C. Marcus and I are partners in a small engineering consultancy working on infrastructure projects across the city. Michael's family lives nearby, and my niece says I tell too many stories about bridges. I am not remarried, though I no longer fear the possibility. Being alone can be peaceful. Being diminished convinces you that you do not deserve peace. Sometimes people ask whether I regret leaving Vanessa that night. I do not. I regret that our marriage became what it became. I regret the pain, the wasted years, and the apology delivered after death. But I do not regret standing up, folding my napkin, and walking out of the room. That man saved my life. He did not know where he would sleep a month later. He did not know whether he would lose his home, his savings, or the future he had imagined. He only knew that remaining seated would teach everyone at the table, including himself, that what happened was acceptable. So, he left. The things that nearly break us often reveal the exact place where rebuilding must begin. Sometimes it begins in therapy, sometimes it begins with an apology, and sometimes it begins on a cold Washington night, with a burning cheek, 2 packed suitcases, and the decision to move forward even when you cannot yet see the road. A bridge does not survive because it never feels pressure. It survives because the weight is finally carried where it belongs.